Hey guys, how's it going? Leak here. This video is going to be showcasing Pack Leader single target and AoE gameplay on the alpha. There's also going to be some Pack Leader specific concerns and bugs that I want to talk about in the second half of this video. So let's get straight into single target. So here are the single target talents that I was running. I think for the most part, these are pretty locked in. There are a couple changes that you could make though. So for example, maybe you could move this improved Wildfire Bomb point over to Bloodseeker. And if you do take Bloodseeker, maybe you can come over to this choice node and you can move Flame Break over to Shrapnel Bomb. So you can reliably provide yourself a bleed to activate Bloodseeker, since Bloodseeker is active from bleeds. If you were playing with another class that provides bleeds, like Warriors, Feral Druids, Assassination Rogues, Ranged Hunters, maybe you just keep that point in Flame Break instead. Bloodseeker works from all bleeds and not just your own, so if you have another class applying bleeds, maybe you don't want Shrapnel Bomb. And then these talent swaps would also give you more auto attacks, which also means more focus regen, because as pack leader, you have lethal barbs, and lethal barbs gives you focus from your auto attacks. One more choice that you could make is maybe you would go to this choice node and swap Wallop over to Bloody Claws. But Bloody Claws is bugged right now in the alpha, so we can't really tell how good it is. But yeah, these are the talents I ran on single target. Maybe they're not optimal, who knows, but it doesn't seem like we have very many choices right now, to be honest. So here is Pack Leader single target gameplay. If you're familiar with Survival on Live, many of these core concepts are the same, and none of these are in any particular order or priority system or anything. So you'll want to make sure that you cast your big spells with Tip of the Spear. And these spells are Boomstick, Wildfire Bomb, and Raptor Swipe if you have the last Apex talent. And you also want to avoid capping Wildfire Bomb charges. So Pack Leader itself also has a couple of mechanics to play around. So Pack Leader's main mechanic is Howl of the Pack Leader. This is a buff that rotates through different beasts in a set rotation. This buff starts out at 25 seconds and can be reduced by casting Kill Command and Raptor Strike. When this buff hits 0 seconds, your beast becomes ready, and your next Kill Command will spawn a beast. After spawning the beast, the buff starts over at 25 seconds and will start rotating to the next beast. If you have a beast ready to spawn, you probably want to Kill Command ASAP so you can spawn the beast and keep that Howl of the Pack Leader buff rolling. Spawning a beast gives you 6 seconds of bomb CDR. You'll want to make sure that spawning a beast won't overcap your bombs. Additionally, when you cast Takedown as Pack Leader, 2 things happen. 1. Your next kill command will spawn a beast. This beast is separate from the normal Howl of the Pack Leader timer. So for example, if you have a beast ready from Howl of the Pack Leader and then you cast Takedown, your next kill command will summon 2 beasts. One from Howl of the Pack Leader and one from the free beast granted by Takedown. Also with beasts, Hogstrider has been changed in Midnight. In War Within, Hogstrider buffed Mongoose Bite. In Midnight, it buffs a new ability called Hatchet Toss. Additionally, the Hog only charges a single time, instead of the 3 times that it charged during War Within. So if you see me ignoring Hogstrider stacks, that's because Hatchet Toss currently isn't worth casting on single target. With only one mob, a single Hog charge is not enough to make Hatchet Toss worth pressing. Right now, it's only worth pressing in AoE when you get enough Hog stacks, and honestly, it seems barely worth pressing in AoE as well, but more on that in the AoE breakdown. Takedown also causes your next kill command to spawn Stampede. So if you've played Pack Leader in Season 3 of the War Within, it's that same Stampede but a little bit weaker. There's also no more funny double Stampedes, it's only 1 Stampede per cooldown now. With the updated Raptor Swipe Apex talent, you'll want to cast Raptor Swipe with a stack of Tip of the Spear as well. Casting Swipe with Tip means Strike as 1 will also hit for 300% extra damage. As Pack Leader, you have a hero talent increasing pet damage and Raptor Strike damage, which means a Tip Raptor Swipe is very strong. You probably won't go out of your way to intentionally tip regular Raptor Strikes though. Maybe with a Wallop proc, but we'll know more when we can sim that later on. And then lastly, there might be some potential gameplay changes if you're running Shrapnel Bomb and Bloodseeker, and you're the only one applying bleeds. So maybe it'll be a thing where you try to avoid casting Wildfire Bomb when your bear is out. So since your bear applies Rend Flesh, you'll have Bloodseeker active while Rend Flesh is ticking on mobs. Holding Bomb means you can apply the Shrapnel Bomb bleed once Rend Flesh wears off, which might give you more Bloodseeker uptime overall. Who knows, maybe this won't be a thing at all, but it is interesting. So here I'm going to show single target breakdowns for dual wield and 2-hand. Before getting into comparisons, I just wanted to show off this 2-hand breakdown before comparing the 2 weapon types. And just a quick disclaimer, tuning hasn't been done yet. It's still very early into the testing cycle, so please don't use actual DPS numbers or anything for any type of comparisons. Tuning will happen later. I just want to show how the current damage breakdowns look. So if you've watched my Sentinel video, you might remember the Wildfire Bomb was on top, and Lunar Storm wasn't too far behind that. Here you can see a very different damage breakdown. We have Raptor Swipe on top doing about 20% of my damage, and Raptor Strike doing a little over 12%. These combined are about 33% of my damage, and that's very different from the breakdown on Sentinel, which had more bomb damage. So if you like the idea of doing more physical damage and being like a more Rexar themed spec versus the more magic themed spec of Sentinel, maybe you'll like playing Pack Leader more. Pack Leader also gets a little more strike as 1 damage, which makes sense. You're casting more Raptor Strikes than Sentinel does. You also do increased pet damage as Pack Leader, so strike as 1 is going to hit harder that way. So here's a comparison log between Dual Wield and Two Hand. Dual Wield is on the left, and Two Hand is on the right. With these tests, all the weapons are the same item levels and have the same stats, just to keep things as equal as possible. What I really want to focus on is the average cast and the average hit for spells between these two different weapons. You can look at almost every single ability and see that the average cast is higher for Two Hand than it is for Dual Wield. So let's look at a couple spells to further break it down. So I am going to start off with Boomstick. As a reminder, Dual Wield is on the left and Two Hand's on the right. So you can see that Boomstick has a higher average cast and a higher average hit on the right, which is Two Hand. You have the higher average cast of 131k versus 127.3k on the left, and then the higher average hit of 32.7 versus 31.8. You can even look at the minimum hit for more data. So if we look at the minimum hit for Dual Wield, you have a minimum hit of 25.4k. If you go to Two Hand, the minimum hit is 26.5k. So even that is slightly higher on Two Hand than it is for Dual Wield. This type of damage difference is expected since all abilities just do less damage if you're dual wielding versus using a two-handed weapon. So we can see the same difference in Raptor Strike. So let me go to Raptor Strike really quickly. The average cast and the average hit for Raptor Strike are both lower while dual wielding, and the minimum hit shows the same thing. So let's look at the minimum hit for dual wielding. So for dual wielding, the minimum hit is 9.8k. And then if you go to Two Hand, the minimum hit is 10.2k. So again, it makes sense, and it lines up with what we're seeing with the ability damage. When you're dual wielding, all your abilities just do less damage, versus if you were to use a two-hand instead. And then the last thing that I want to look at is focus regen. Focus regen is also a bit different between the two. Since you auto-attack more frequently while you're dual wielding, especially with daggers, you'll be getting a lot more focus regen from lethal barbs, which you can see here. I did waste a little more focus while I was dual wielding, but that might just be a skill issue. So I just really wanted to point out that all your abilities are just doing less damage while you're dual wielding. You can see that the damage breakdowns for both types are roughly the same. Dual Wield has some bugs that's lowering its DPS, like for example, Takedown only hits once while you're dual wielding for whatever reason. You can see that it hits twice when you're using a two-handed weapon, but while you're dual wielding it only hit once. So dual wielding is doing a little less damage because of that bug, but in general all your abilities are still just much weaker when you're dual wielding versus two-hand, and this difference is only going to get larger and larger as our gear increases. But yeah, this is one look at dual wield versus two-hand, and up next is going to be AoE. So here are the talents that I was running for AoE. And like single target, I think that for the most part these are pretty locked in, but there are a couple changes you might be able to make though. So for example, here I was running Shrapnel Bomb with Bloodseeker, and with Bomb hitting 5 targets, that's a 50% attack speed increase for my pet and I. Maybe you have another bleed spec in your group, so then you could swap Shrapnel Bomb over to Flame Break and just get more bomb damage that way. Maybe you can move these improved Wildfire Bomb points into Sweeping Spear and get more Raptor Strike and Raptor Swipe damage from your Apex talents. I also swapped Mongoose rounds over to Wildfire Shells, just to create that feedback loop between Boomstick and Wildfire Bomb. And then I also dropped Wallop, and I moved that into Flanked, which lets Takedown do AoE damage. And then over in the Pack Leader tree, I went and I swapped Ursine Fury over to Sharpened Claws, since Rend Flesh just seems to be stronger than the Dire Beasts are for AoE. But yeah, these are the talents that I ran for AoE. Again, maybe they're not optimal, but it doesn't seem like we have that much flexibility right now. So AoE gameplay for the most part is basically the same priorities that I mentioned for the single target portion, but there are a couple differences though. So one difference here is that maybe you'll want to cast Boomstick during Takedown instead of before Takedown. On single target, you'll probably want to cast Boomstick before Takedown since you'll be using it as a mini ramp cooldown. But in AoE, however, it just straight up does a lot of damage, so maybe you'll want to use it during Takedown to buff it by 20% instead. Another difference is that you'll be casting Wildfire Bomb and Boomstick much more often in AoE. You have two talents that work together to create an AoE loop: Lethal Calibration and Wildfire Shells. Lethal Calibration gives us more Boomstick CDR in AoE than it does on single target because you're hitting more enemies with bombs, so you get more CDR. On AoE, you might also be playing the Wildfire Shells choice node instead of Mongoose rounds. Wildfire Shells causes every Boomstick shot to give you 2 seconds of bomb CDR, so this, combined with Lethal Calibration, causes a really nice gameplay loop where you're casting bombs, and those bombs give you Boomstick CDR, so then you can cast Boomstick more, and your boomstick cast gives you more bombs, and then those more bombs give you more boomsticks, and so on. So it's a really fun feedback loop, and it gives a distinct playstyle difference between single target and AoE. The last difference is Hatchet Toss and Hogstrider. On single target, Hatchet Toss wasn't worth using. Hogstrider didn't stack high enough to make Hatchet Toss worth pressing. In AoE, however, that's not the case. As long as your boar is hitting enough targets, Hatchet Toss will be worth pressing. It seems like it's around 3 or 4 stacks that makes it worth pressing. I'm not super sure on that one yet, but it seems like it's something around there. But it's also sometimes possible to carry Hogstrider stacks into your takedown window, so maybe you can throw out a big Hatchet Toss during takedown, and maybe that's going to be a thing. Who knows? Since Hatchet Toss does a decent amount of damage in AoE, you'll probably want to buff this with Tip of the Spear as well. But yeah, the same concepts still apply. Tip Boomstick, Tip Bomb, Tip Raptor Swipe, don't cap bombs, spend your Hogstrider stacks on Hatchet Toss, and the fundamentals are still the same, but the gameplay itself feels pretty different since you're pressing a lot more bombs, a lot more boomsticks, and you're adding in a new button with Hatchet Toss. If you like playing Pack Leader on live, you'll probably enjoy Pack Leader at midnight. It's a little less hectic than live Pack Leader in AoE. Not only was the bomb CDR from spawning a beast reduced, but we also spawn slightly less beasts now, which is also less bombs, and that's also less Hogstrider procs. Additionally, since the Hog only charges 1 time instead of 3 times, you don't have to worry about weaving in spells to avoid wasting stacks of Hogstrider. I think it's pretty enjoyable, but I am enjoying Sentinel a little bit more right now on Alpha. Anyway, that's going to be it for this. Up next, I'll be showing off the log for this target dummy test that I just did. So here is the log for the AoE test that I just showed off. This log is just going to be for 2-hand, and it's also using the talent build that I showed a bit earlier. No dual wield this time, but if you lower all the ability damage by 2 or 3% and slightly increase the auto attack damage, you could just pretend I was dual wielding. So if you watched the Sentinel video, you may have noticed that Boomstick was on top there. And it's still on top for Pack Leader, but not to the extent that it was for Sentinel. You can also see that Raptor Swipe is pretty strong, and it's nice to see our Apex talent putting in work for Pack Leader. So for Pack Leader, Strikers 1 is doing almost 9% of my damage, while for Sentinel it was doing around 6%. And this is because Pack Leader just does more pet damage. They have a talent that increases pet damage. And I think it's nice to see each hero tree have slightly different damage allocations and damage breakdowns. The other things that I want to point out are Takedown and Hatchet Toss. So for this video, I was using the talent Flanked, which makes Takedown deal 50% additional damage and lets it hit 5 targets. Takedown does 2 hits of damage, just like Flanking Strike does on live. There's the player portion of Takedown and the pet portion of Takedown. These aren't merged on the log, but you can see them individually. You can see the player takedown is almost at 6%, and the pet takedown is a little over 4%. So on these dummies, takedown was doing almost 10% of my damage, and this is something you only press once a minute. So with Flanked, it feels pretty impactful when you press takedown in AoE. And you can also buff takedown with Tip of the Spear for even more damage. So another thing I want to look at is Hatchet Toss. So Hatchet Toss here did 2.6% of my damage over 7 casts. Nothing crazy, but it's still doing more than a tipped Raptor Swipe, so it's worth casting at some point. And lastly, I just want to show the average cast of each ability. So Boomstick's still on top. You can see Boomstick's doing quite a bit of damage at almost 557k per cast. Takedown is right underneath that, but this takedown is only the player portion since the player and pet aren't merged. If you were to combine the pet portion of Takedown with the player portion of Takedown, it would be around 460k as an average cast. That's not quite as strong as Boomstick, but keep in mind Boomstick is also a channel spell, and it does damage over the cast time. For a single GCD, Takedown chunks pretty hard. And last, you can see Hatchet Toss right under Takedown. So also, I do want to point out that you might see Raptor Swipe above Wildfire Bomb here, and I want to be clear that this does not mean you should ignore Bomb. That Bomb damage is only the initial hit of Bomb, and it's not including the periodic portion of Bomb. Additionally, Raptor Swipe can only be triggered after casting Raptor Strike. And Raptor Strike itself isn't doing very much in AoE. So just know that Bomb is definitely still a very strong button, and it's just a little bit misleading here, and it would most likely still be ahead of Raptor Swipe here if things were merged, since it doesn't have the initial and periodic effects combined. I guess one last thing to note would be the Pack Leader Bear. So you might notice that it's not as strong as it is during the War Within. Here, it's only doing about 4.6% of my damage, but on live, I think it's doing like 10 or 12% of my damage. So in Midnight, the bear is slightly nerfed, so it won't be as strong as you're used to seeing it. So I do want to finish this video with a few concerns that I do have about Pack Leader, and the first thing I want to talk about is the Cooldown Manager. So right now in the Cooldown Manager, we can only track when beasts are ready as Pack Leader. We cannot track the rotating Howl of the Pack Leader buff, And this hero tree plays around that buff, and it's kind of essential for us to be able to see that buff. Right now, the only way to see it is by looking in the top right corner of our screen. And that's just not feasible to do, like especially in combat. So let me show you what I mean. These are the 3 beasts, and you'll see them pop up. So I go to a dummy, I'll attack it. And you can see how all of the pack leader is ticking down now, only in the top right corner of my screen, and I have no way to track this in the Cooldown Manager. And if I were to press takedown to get a beast, the beast pops up here. And if I press kill command, that goes away. But there's still no way to track how all of the pack leader. So another thing that I'd like to see added to the Cooldown Manager is the ability to track your bear's rend flesh dot. So there might end up being some gameplay if you're running Shrapnel Bomb and Bloodseeker, where you want to maximize Bloodseeker uptime, and how you would do this is not casting Shrapnel Bomb while the bear's rend flesh is active. And right now, there's not an easy way to track that. Like, we can track other dots in the Cooldown Manager, like we have Wildfire Bomb here. So I feel like just adding rend flesh would be very beneficial, and if that playstyle does end up becoming a thing, it would be almost necessary to have it tracked. So another concern I have is over Hatchet Toss, and these are just some general concerns for Hatchet Toss. So right now, Hatchet Toss is not worth casting on single target at all. I'm not sure if this is intentional or not, but it definitely feels like Pack Leader has some room in the rotation to add in Hatchet Toss. The boar spawns are once every 30 to 40 seconds, and I think that adding in Hatchet Toss on single target every 30 to 40 seconds would add some nice variety of gameplay to the spec. It's not too frequent, but it is enough to be noticeable. I don't have any potential solutions on how to make Hatchet Toss worth it on single target, but I just know that it is not worth casting on single target. So for example, on single target, you'll get 2 Hogstrider stacks every time the boar hits 1 target. So baseline, if we look at the tooltip for Hatchet Toss does 2363 damage. And if we were to go and look at Raptor Strike does 9327 damage. And that's not including any Mongoose Fury stacks or any procs like Wallop. So even if you were to increase Hatchet Toss by 200%, it's still doing less damage than Raptor Strike. And there's another issue. So there's a choice node in Pack Leader called Hoof and Blade. And Hoof and Blade increases the damage of Hogstrider and makes Hatchet Toss do more damage. But it's up against a choice node for Wyvern's Gaze, which increases the damage buff by 5% and makes it last longer. So not only is Hatchet Toss almost never worth pressing, but it's up against a really strong choice node. So why would you intentionally buff Hatchet Toss, which is not a strong spell to begin with, when you can just take Wyvern's Gaze and buff all your damage and give you a longer buff? I think something needs to be done with this choice node to make it more appealing. So lastly, I just want to rapid fire some Pack Leader specific bugs for survival. If you'd like to see a list of all these bugs, I'll put a link to this bug sheet in the description of the video. The first thing that I want to talk about is Wyvern's Cry. So for BM, this starts off at 10%, but for survival, it starts off at 15%. Now this causes a couple of issues down here. So the first talent we have is Fury of the Wyvern. So this talent should cause pet attacks to increase the damage bonus by 1% up to 10%, but right now, this damage bonus on the Wyvern caps out at 20%. So this talent is only letting it increase by 5% instead of 10%. Additionally, we have Wyvern's Gaze, where the damage bonus of Wyvern is increased by 5% and lasts an additional 4 seconds. But this damage bonus doesn't work at all, because again, the Wyvern caps out at 20%. So with Fury of the Wyvern plus Wyvern's Gaze, the Wyvern should be going up to 30% total, but right now it's only going up to 20% for survival. Another thing that I want to talk about is our new Apex talent, Raptor Swipe. So this talent's really fun to play with and it's nice to have, but there are a lot of bugs with it right now, and one of them is for Pack Leader specifically. So Raptor Swipe will occasionally replace Raptor Strike, but this causes some issues because Pack Leader plays around a buff called Howl of the Pack Leader. And as survival, casting Kill Command or Raptor Strike will reduce the cooldown of Howl of the Pack Leader. Raptor Swipe replaces Raptor Strike, but doesn't reduce the cooldown of Howl of the Pack Leader. So now this is kinda, it feels like a bug or it's an oversight or something, where Raptor Strike reduces the cooldown, but Raptor Swipe doesn't reduce the cooldown. But because of this, we're getting less beast spawns than we really should. Another bug is that Takedown doesn't do full damage if you're dual wielding. I'm not even sure why this is a thing, but if you're dual wielding, Takedown doesn't do the player portion of Takedown damage. It only does the pet hit. But if you're using a two-handed weapon, it does the full damage of the player hit and the pet hit. So I'm not sure what could be causing that. Maybe there's some type of check in the spell that doesn't work with dual wield weapons. I'm not sure. But if you're dual wielding, Takedown does less damage than it's supposed to. Another fun one that everyone's familiar with on live is that some of the Pack Leader beasts can just straight up miss. So if your boar spawns and it's near like a wall or some weird terrain, the boar can just get stuck in place and just run in place and never hit the target. And then another one is Stampede. Stampede can just straight up miss targets because of elevation. And this happened a lot during Mana Forge Omega, but it can also happen in Mythic Plus whenever there's like stairs or something that can cause Stampede to miss. And it's really frustrating, especially since it's coming back as the capstone talent for Pack Leader. It feels really bad knowing that Stampede can just miss. Another bug for Pack Leader is on Pack Mentality. So Pack Mentality should cause Howl of the Pack Leader to increase damage of kill command by 100%. Right now, for survival, it's only increasing kill command damage by 50%, and that 50% is the BM value. So right now, Pack Mentality is just using the BM value for survival instead of the actual survival value of 100%. Another one that isn't Pack Leader specific, but it does affect Pack Leader more because Pack Leader does more pet damage, is Bloody Claws. Right now, this talent isn't working as it should. Instead of Mongoose Fury buffing the damage of Strike as 1 by 10% per stack, it's increasing it by 1% per stack. So it's kind of hard to see how good this node is supposed to be when it doesn't work properly. So the last thing that I want to talk about is Hatchet Toss. So currently the global cooldown of Hatchet Toss isn't affected by haste. What that means is that with haste, you'll see the GCD of other spells speed up, but this Hatchet Toss GCD is still, I think, 1.5 seconds baseline. It's really slow, and it's something that's really noticeable while you're under, like Bloodlust, for example. So let me show you what I mean. So I'll Lust, I'll cast kill commands. You can see the GCDs pretty quick. Now I'll cast Hatchet Toss. That is very slow. It's not easy to see, but if you look closely, you can see that the GCD is definitely much slower than on any other spell. It's just really awkward. I'm not sure what's going on with that, but it would feel a lot better if that was fixed. So that's going to be it for this video. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the direction that Survival's heading. The gameplay is very fun and very fluid, and I'm looking forward to seeing what updates the beta brings. So remember, if you're in beta and you're providing feedback, please try to provide quality feedback. So if something is bad or doesn't work, don't just say, "This talent sucks." Try to be nice about it and explain your reasoning. You don't have to offer any solutions, but you should really try to explain why you think something isn't working out. So let me know what you guys thought in the comments. With beta around the corner, I'm going to try to continue making videos to cover any changes that affect survival. So please like and subscribe if you're enjoying my content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.